Welcome back to another Resident Evil series episode here on the main quest. And man, it has been a very long time, probably not since summer of 2023 after the RE4 remake released, have I put one of these out. But fortunately for me, fortunately for you, for everybody who loves Resident Evil, a brand new mainline entry is releasing next month. It is, of course, Resident Evil Requiem, and by law, I will be required to cover that. So the series, of course, is not over. Until that day comes, I wanted to sit down and talk about what I want, what I expect out of a new Resident Evil game, where we are possibly headed after Village, and what I think Resident Evil is as a series at this point. And you guys know me. I don't really get hyped for any video game releases, but I have been covering this series of games for a very long time, and I'd be lying to you if I said I wasn't excited to get my hands on the new one because of just how invested that I've become. And returning listeners will know there are quite a few entries in the series that I am not fond of. So whether this new game hits on everything I think it should, or whether it completely misses, hey, still part of the canon, still part of the lore, and it is something that I will, in some instances, come away with some respect. So with that out of the way, let me just do some quick housekeeping here for the main feed faithful, because you can no longer go back and listen to the complete coverage of the Resident Evil series that I have released. I believe the main feed cuts it off at around Resident Evil 5, but patrons get legacy episodes, which includes everything I've done, including a one-off episode I did on Sweet Home, as well as 60 other episodes that are also no longer on this very feed. You can get access to all of that and more if you sign up at the $1 tier over at patreon.com/the main quest. If you are a Resident Evil fan, it will be absolutely worth your 100 cents. And even if you're just casually playing them because you like to shoot the undead, you'll at least be entertained as I yell about the absolutely ludicrous narrative that has been strung along throughout every game. With that said, I don't know why I'm talking like this, by the way. I will possibly be spoiling many games tonight. Definitely 7 and Village, and probably a few others as I shotgun my thoughts here. So if there is a game in the franchise that you haven't played, or if you haven't played any of these games, I don't know why you're here, and you do want to play them, I guess this is your warning. But again, like I don't know why you would be. Why would you be listening to a predictions episode about the 9th mainline entry? Who knows? I'm not your keeper. Let's get into my thoughts on the upcoming Resident Evil Requiem. So first thing I should explain to you guys, and many people will already know this, but it bears repeating for the new listeners, is that when a new game comes out, 99% of the time I go into those games completely blind. I want to go in knowing as little as possible about what I'm about to experience, because then my expectations can be balanced as possible. And now that I've pretty much stepped away from social media, outside of Instagram, it has been very difficult for any outside noise to leak through and spoil this new game for me. So then you're probably wondering, well, how can you do a predictions episode? And it's very easy. I mean, I do know some things kind of about Resident Evil 9. I saw the reveal trailer, which I believe debuted at Key 3, and that's it. I know there's been at least 3 other trailers after that. The week of this recording, actually, they're debuting another gameplay trailer, I guess. And there's been a ton of press and interviews. And I know that after that initial reveal, a ton of people were pissed off, I guess, because there seemed to be no signs of Leon in the game. Like, what the
That was too close.
What are we doing? Why are you... How is that the sticking point? What is out of nowhere? Like, what is that? Why are you grasping onto that? I can't understand the mentality of a person who not only sees a woman as the main character and like gets pissed off about that, but then also the hand holding that these people need to have in order to have, like, I guess, some familiarity with the franchise that they're playing. Personally, I think we need to move on from Chris, Leon, Wesker, Claire, and all of the other legacy characters. Like, Resident Evil is starting to become Star Wars. And I get, like, the inciting incident in this franchise is because of Wesker and Birkin. And I don't mind the name drops, but do we need those people in our games anymore? And all this is to say that I do know that Leon is in Resident Evil 9. You literally cannot even search for Resident Evil Requiem and not only see, the trending tweets and articles about him being in the game, but he's also in the key art now. So I have to ask, and I don't know, it might actually be a silly thought to wonder if Capcom caved and put Leon in the game. Because obviously the game was announced last summer of 2024, and it's releasing next month. So from the point of reveal to release, I mean, the game was pretty much, it has to be pretty much done, right? Capcom finishes their games. They're not known for delays. Their stuff outside of Street Fighter and Monster Hunter are pretty much polished experiences. And so then I have to wonder how integral Leon is to Resident Evil Requiem. Is it a situation in which he just kind of pops up at the end of it, like Chris did at Resident Evil 7? Or, well, I guess that was more of a surprise, right, for the diehards. Nobody knew Chris was going to be in RE7. Maybe it's a Metal Gear 2 Solid situation. Have the old switcheroo happen, Again, I haven't seen any of the trailers. You probably know. He's probably in them. But do I hope that he actually serves a bigger purpose than Chris does in Resident Evil 7 or 8? Of course I do. Did I get all bricked up when you play Chris's campaign at the end of Resident Evil 8? You bet I did. But did I need Chris in those games? Not really. And when you think about the somewhat isolated stories of 7 and 8, Chris is really only there to be the exposition guy. He lets Ethan know what's going on. He's there to give broader context to the events that occur outside of Louisiana and Europe or wherever the hell Village takes place. And not to mention that it's never explained why Chris now works for Umbrella, or just how in the hell Umbrella was reestablished from this shady government agency that is now on the side of good. And also the BSAA are bad guys now, I guess. And so with those questions still kind of floating out in the air, they could have just thrown anybody into that position. They didn't need Chris, especially since Ethan's arc is an offshoot of the main events of the series. I think the reliance of putting in these legacy characters is just fan service at this point. And I know that these legacy characters, they're basically, they're superheroes, and age probably doesn't mean a goddamn thing in this franchise. But man, they're old. And on a personal note, for me, I mean, that's what made 7 and 8 scary for me. Ethan is not a superhero. He's just some guy. It was nice getting that power fantasy back at the end of 8 when you do play as Chris, but if Capcom is staying within the bounds of survival horror, I don't want Leon parading around being a snarky creep who will no doubt hit on the new protagonist. Anyway, I feel like I'm in full rant mode right now, and I do have a rough outline here, some bullet points that I want to hit on, but I feel like this is probably a good time to talk about how I hope that this game leans more into horror than action. A lot of you already know I am not a fan of the more action-focused games in this series, which is 4 through 6, and even some of 8. I do not really like those parts. To some degree, you can argue, and I have argued, all of the Resident Evil games are more action-focused than any of their contemporaries. I guess except Silent Hill, because I guess Silent Hill is just Dark Souls now. Who wants combat in Silent Hill? Anyway, when you break down what Resident Evil has been, it has had eras, like it has its trilogies. 1 through 3 are dedicated to scaring you. They've got classic survival horror mechanics. 4 through 6 then are now, these are the pure action games. The scares are basically cosmetics painted on a Call of Duty game. So we're seeing these eras come in threes, right? So it's interesting because 7 and 8 are, again, these are isolated stories. They bring back elements of classic survival horror, but inject a bit more action from some of the other games to kind of satiate the casual player. And so is 9 going to follow that same template as 7 and 8? When I think about my time with Village or 8, I think it was pretty unbalanced when it came to those elements. Obviously, what I find scary and what someone else will find scary is completely subjective. But Village, again, I'm using 8 and Village interchangeably here. I'm going to do that with 9 and Requiem. They're all the same. Whatever. Listen, Capcom has issues naming the Resident Evil games these days. I don't know what's going on anymore. And maybe the naming convention has something to do to hint that this is basically another trilogy. Because technically Resident Evil 7 was called Biohazard 7. And as we know, Biohazard has been the franchise name in Japan all this time. But it finally made its way over here to the US. So it feels very intentional. So you got Biohazard 7, and then you've got Resident Evil Village, and now you've got Resident Evil Requiem. So it's technically 7, 8, and 9, but only Resident Evil 7 has the number in it. And so Village, going back to Village, it's all over the place when it comes to atmosphere. And it really threw off the pacing of the game for me. So if Capcom is executing these games as trilogies, as eras within the franchise, I have to wonder if they've refined the formula from 7 and 8, and 9 is really just the ultimate hybrid of the survival horror and action approach. Which if they can execute on, I am totally down for that. And again, from only seeing this debut trailer, this does look a little more horror adjacent, but if I know Capcom, they also want to get those casual players in. They want somebody to be able to jump in and play the game no matter where they're coming at it from. Which leads me to the next thing, and it's something that is somewhat contentious within the Resident Evil community for some reason, got to have something to complain about, is whether or not Requiem will be first or third person. Resident Evil Village was first person. They did release DLC that allows you to play it in third person. But, you know, I guess if you've watched the other trailers or read interviews or whatever, you guys already know the answer to this. I don't. Personally, I don't give a
That was too close.
which perspective this game is played in. Other than it possibly being an issue with motion sickness or it being some sort of an accessibility issue, man, who the
Stars.
cares? I don't get it. Stop complaining. I have to move on here because I do want to talk a little bit about Capcom themselves. Thank you all for being here. I apologize for any inconvenience this might have caused. So let's just cut to the point. As the new CGO, I have noticed the company's growth has stagnated. Our current profits are, to put it simply, not sufficient for what I envision.
Chris, I grow weary of this.
Apologies, President Wesker. And to clarify, with all due respect, my name is Keith.
Only those fit for survival will be allowed to carry their genes into a new age.
Right. Yeah, so
Chris!
these figures represent our future capital, and as you know, the market can be unpredictable.
Chris!
Me? Yeah? Yes, Mr. President.
Let me clarify something for you, Chris. 7 minutes is all I can spare to play with you.
Okay. Got it. And again, with all due respect, my name is Keith.
Poor deluded Chris, how you so love your precious self-righteousness.
Well, risk is an essential part of growth, and this is why I present to the board the Main Quest Podcast merch store.
Pathetic. Only a handful of humans truly matter. Everyone else is just so much chaff.
Again, all due respect, sir. Perhaps we can use this opportunity to reach out to a different generation with t-shirt designs that embody the podcast, align with its values, and just look cool.
You will give me an egg.
We won't be selling any food on the merch store, though the markup on eggs is rather profitable these days. We want to dominate the marketplace. What is it you always say? Complete, global, saturation?
Affirmative.
So instead of focusing on the food sector, let's focus on uniquely designed stickers, hats, hoodies, and tanks. The potential here is vast. The more people that purchase something from the Main Quest merch store, the more people become aware of the podcast, and the buyer gets something in return, knowing they're supporting an indie podcast and designer. It is a statement of power, Mr. Wesker.
Impressive. Good work. You will give me a can of first aid spray.
With all due respect, Mr. Wesker, maybe you should go ahead and check out tpublic.com/user/the Main Quest podcast. Or just visit the link in the show notes. You won't find any eggs or first aid spray, but there will be something there for everybody.
Good teamwork. It was in your best interest to assist me.
So Resident Evil is Capcom's biggest franchise by a large margin, even bigger than Street Fighter. And not to diminish Street Fighter here, it is a solid pillar when it comes to Capcom, same as Monster Hunter. And when you look at my own podcast, even outside of Resident Evil, I have played a lot of Capcom games growing up. They've easily been my favorite developer and publisher throughout the years, and they still might be 40 years later. the longevity of Capcom is insane when you think about it. I mean, when you get into the late 80s, they were pretty well established and were the company that was like licensing games and getting them for pretty cheap. So they were a well-known developer for that at that time. And they were known for making those licensed games and making something good out of them. They were mostly making very quality games. Not all of them were bangers, but if you were licensing out your IP, you knew it was in good hands, which helped them gain momentum and financial security to kind of create their own games, of course. And so you get the Mega Man games. You get Street Fighter and all of its iterations. Resident Evil, Strider, all of these things kind of made them a household name, including all of the licensed stuff that they continue to make with, stuff like Marvel, Darkstalkers is in there, numerous beat 'em ups. And now that I remembered, maybe I misspoke about Resident Evil, because by the time that was released, Capcom actually wasn't in a very good place financially, which is sort of where the gears kind of began to shift for Capcom. Like, they were really just trying to plug the holes in the ship with more Mega Man and Street Fighter games. So I think their presence and the IP that they relied on so heavily were kind of wearing a bit thin on the general public. But there wasn't really ever anything bad about those games. It's just that somewhere along the lines, they stopped innovating and just started iterating. Mega Man 6 by itself is not a bad game, but once you've played the first 5 plus the Game Boy games, and then you get to 6 and the Super Nintendo's out, it's just like, man, why are we still playing this? Yeah, they were no longer creatively invincible by the late 90s, and with a new smash hit like Resident Evil, they may have even started to choke that fire out too by the time Code Veronica came out. People were already getting a little tired of Resident Evil by the early 2000s. But then Resident Evil 4 happens, which not only invigorated the franchise, it changed the entire industry. And as for Capcom themselves, despite its successes with Resident Evil 4, they were still kind of floundering. Like, the success of Resident Evil 4 was kind of a double-edged sword because they started to lose their identity. And it just wasn't Capcom, right? Around this time, it was a lot of Japanese developers who were just trying to appeal to an American audience as, Microsoft, this new player in the games industry, was ushering in this new age of American developers and creating these massive, like, first-person shooter games, their own brand of RPGs. And of course, you get the birth of indie games. And Japanese developers were just kind of getting lost in the shuffle after being so dominant for the better part of 15 years. So a lot of the stuff that we were seeing from them were just being outsourced to American-led teams. You got all the Devil May Cry sequels, and those had their ups and downs as far as the reception goes. Same with Dead Rising. Street Fighter 4 helped revive that franchise, but also left a lot of people frustrated with all of the DLC stuff surrounding that. You got other games like Killer 7, God Hand, Dark Void, Lost Planet. A lot of these games are things that people talk about now, but they were never popular. And Resident Evil only continued to sell off of name recognition until everyone pretty much just had it with Resident Evil 6, which I totally get. Trust me. And on a personal level, Capcom was in my rear view, mostly because, again, I didn't like the action-based RE games. I never liked Street Fighter. And the Mega Man games that were coming out were just, as you know, I lovingly call them Gen Z Mega Man. They were just like these weird card battlers all of a sudden. Also didn't help that they were all handheld games because I didn't own a GBA or a DS at the time. So yeah, man, Capcom kind of just got lost in the sauce here for quite a while, especially for me, until they really honed in on those 3 central IPs that they had: Street Fighter, Monster Hunter, and Resident Evil. Also developing their own proprietary engine helps take a lot of the work out developing a game. Literally everything that they've made since Resident Evil 7 has been made with the RE engine. And then you got the remakes, they revive classic Mega Man, they start focusing on developing games for PC, and now they're kind of sort of in the same position that they were in the early 90s, and they're now kind of playing with house money, and they can kind of do whatever they want. But I also think they have learned a lot from the Kenzo Sugimoto days. And with the state of the industry as it is, they're also a little more risk adverse as well because they just don't want to haphazardly produce new stuff. Which, well, I guess asterisks on that one, right? They keep trying to really break out and do like more on the multiplayer side of things. And the only successful multiplayer game that they've ever had in their back pocket is Street Fighter and Monster Hunter. Exoprimal exists. That is a game that I played. That's a thing. I'm pretty certain that was like their most recent flop. But also, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, they probably didn't spend too much money making that game. Capcom isn't Squaresoft. They're not Squaresoft, in which every game they make could possibly be their last. And Capcom's doing well enough at this point that they're now making a new Dead Rising game, which, again, a franchise that has had its up and downs. Not a massively successful one, but the last game was in 2015 or 2016, so I guess it's been long enough that people missed those games, so why not? Pragmata. That's a game that's supposedly coming out this year. Brand new IP. Looks like sci-fi Resident Evil, and I guess we'll see how that plays out. That's a game that I'm actually looking forward to. No sarcasm. No, seriously, no sarcasm. I want to play that game. Here I am rambling again. Capcom is they've found themselves in a second golden age, and all of the success, all of the great games that they're releasing, it makes me feel young again, god damn it. And so when it comes to RE9, because yes, again, this is a Resident Evil podcast, I promise you, I just can't see Resident Evil 9 being bad no matter what direction they decide to take with it. They're experimenting enough as to not alienate an entire audience. First-person shooters have been very successful for the better part of 25 years. Making the last 2 Resident Evil games in first person was a new move for the franchise, a risky move, but they were able to pull it off because of how atmospheric those games are, how much more pulled into the experience you are when you're not looking over someone's shoulders, and just how good it felt to play those games. Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 8, they also don't have zombies. And those games are still about bioterrorism, but like a different kind of outbreak. Goop men and werewolves and dummy thick vampires.
That was too close.
Yeah. One thing I'm scared of, though, no pun intended, is if they go with the mentality that a lot of developers like to do, is that bigger is better with Resident Evil 9, right? And they did that. The Capcom has been there before. Resident Evil 6, that they did that. It doesn't work. And in the reveal trailer for Requiem, it looks like we'll have the run of Raccoon City. If the game even actually takes place in Raccoon City at all. Again, I know nothing. I think I tweeted something like 2 years ago, or probably after I played Village, in that I thought that Capcom should make the next Resident Evil game an open world game. And I only said that because 8 flirts with that idea, but is more closely associated with like a Metroid-like in structure. And like, how do you make an open world horror game even work? Like, how do you make that scary? How do you make a situation tense when you can just walk away from it? I guess I just don't want the game, the story in the world to be as convoluted as 5 and 6. I want it to be small, like 7 and 8, with the hint that there's something bigger out there, of course. But from what I can tell, the game obviously takes place sometime after Raccoon City is nuked. We get shots of the city. There's a massive crater, decimated RPD. And so is this game a few years after Resident Evil 3? Well, I guess it can't be, right? Leon is in the game and he looks old as
Stars.
right now. Totally possible that this takes place during the events of Resident Evil 7, which would put Leon in his early 40s. Damn, I said he looks old. I said Leon is old. I'm in my early 40s. I'm the old.
That was too close.
So if this is after Resident Evil 8, and I mean after Resident Evil 8 I mean after when Rose is all grown up. When she's all grown up, that would put Leon in his early 60s. Maybe like 61 or 62, because that would chronologically place Resident Evil 9 around the year 2038. Because Leon is 21 during the events of RE2, and Resident Evil 8 takes place concurrently with our time. All the games do. So in 2021, Rose is roughly 16 or 17 by the end of that game. So that's where my math sits. Personally, I would rather this take place in 2017, and then they can explain what's going on with the main through line of Raccoon City, like the T-Virus stuff and the fallout of Umbrella that was just completely dropped once Resident Evil 4 came along, and then they just kind of half-assedly returned to all of that stuff in Resident Evil 6 and just fumbled the bag as hard as possible. You know what? How about this? Hopefully Resident Evil 9 just launches Resident Evil 6 from canon. Just absolutely nuke it from the timeline. We don't need it. Just rewrite it. It never happened. Dinosaur T-Rexes and a helicopter chase. It doesn't exist. Unfortunately, Resident Evil 5 still exists in the timeline because Heisenberg references it in Resident Evil 8. But yeah, I mean, it does look like from that debut trailer that they're still kind of going for a strong atmosphere here, and kind of keeping the slower pace of the last two games. And I hope that's the case. And I also hope that just because we're shown a larger world, that it doesn't mean it's a world filled to the brim with, too many characters. I still want the game to feel intimate. Man, and the other thing that I really loved from the first trailer is that the main character, Grace Ashcroft, by the way, which I mistakenly got mixed up with the Ashfords from Code Veronica, which led me to waste my
Stars.
time playing Code Veronica in anticipation for RE9, thinking that there was going to be a strong connection. But no, I guess not. Well, I guess I don't know. There still could be. But the names are way too similar, and it pisses me off that I went ahead and played Code Veronica. And no, I'm not going to expound on that thought. And so going back to Grace and going back to just from what I've seen, it seems like she's tracking down a serial killer, which it's such a cool premise if that's what they're actually doing with the story. And I think all the way back in my first Resident Evil episode, I mentioned how I loved the fact that that game begins on a new story about killer cannibals and these mysterious deaths happening around the mountain area over there. Revisiting that that premise, but in the aftermath of Raccoon City, sounds like they could get a ton of mileage out of that storyline. I just hope it's not like a Walking Dead type of thing where like some dude is just, I don't know, keeping zombies in his apartment and is feeding people to them or something, which I guess that wouldn't even really work because of the virus. He would just be making more zombies. The humans are the monsters all along. But also, man, a serial killer sneaking around, killing people, using the ever-present shadow of the zombies and the infection to cover their tracks, I feel like could be another great take on this. Or I could be completely wrong, because I didn't watch the other trailers. Yeah, so I'm looking at time. I didn't want this episode to be longer than 15 minutes. I didn't want this to be as long as it is. And I think at this point, I'm just kind of circling the same ideas despite the outline that I have, which means that I've probably said exactly what I set out to say. I more or less just wanted this to be a check-in just in case the franchise decides to change everything up once again. It's more of a way to let you guys know what I'm anticipating, being open about what I will probably get wrong, and just being genuinely surprised and then recording that reaction for you guys when I do cover the game eventually. I think I needed to talk all of this stuff out to kind of center my expectations as well. So I think this was just kind of a nice way for me to get back to baseline. I really don't need Resident Evil 9 or Resident Evil Requiem, whatever we're calling it, which you bet your ass I'm going to be joking about that later in its episode. I don't expect the game to reinvent the wheel. It doesn't need to top Resident Evil 4 or be as scary as Resident Evil 7 or have the storytelling of Resident Evil 2. I just want it to fit naturally in the universe again, outside of the Winter's arc. I want a little restraint. I want some atmosphere. I want the scares to come from atmosphere and not from spectacle. And more than anything, I want to feel like Capcom still knows what Resident Evil is, even after the course correcting and the constant reinvention. And like I said, I'm totally open to being wrong about everything I've said tonight. I probably am. But the best version of this game is the one that surprises me without betraying itself. So, with that said, we're only a few weeks away from release, and no doubt 6 or 7 months until the release of that episode. If for some reason you've made it this far in, and you don't know much about the story and lore of Resident Evil, well, do I have the antidote for you? Go back and listen to all 10 of those episodes. They are in the backlog. And again, if you are a patron, they're all on a handy playlist so you can play them back to back. In fact, if you are a patron, you have access to all of them, which I didn't remove the episodes on purpose or anything. I have no idea why Spotify nuked a majority of my feed. I do not know. But if you're a patron, $1 gets you access to all of that and a lot more. With that said, I'll talk to you guys next time when I talk about Resident Evil Requiem.